So, Dave, we work in the FP&A space, and there's several technology or solutions, if you like, that business can implement. Yeah, they would obviously go through a process of evaluating such solutions. But perhaps, do you want to share a little bit about the technology we implement, and yeah, what are the perhaps the pros and cons of that solution?
Yeah, absolutely. The market does have a lot of tools out there. I mean, if you were to put in Google or I suppose even Copilot or ChatGPT nowadays, like what are the best CPM, EPM, or FP&A tools out there at the moment, you're going to get a whole host of them. And I think we've been in the game long enough now as well. All the vendors are going to say theirs is the best and they're the be all and end all. However, look, we do partner with Workday Adaptive Planning as our primary tool of choice to deploy for our clients. And mainly the reason for that is what I like to think of is that the best tool is just one that gets adopted, one that's used, right? So the first thing that comes to mind is one of the pros certainly of Adaptive is its ease of use and user friendliness. All right, so it's not a solution that is going to handle absolutely all situations. We're not certainly not arrogant enough to say, yeah, this is the be all and end all, as I said before, but it is the most easiest to use, easy to adopt. For our clients who are we tend to work with more finance people as opposed to IT. They don't know, you know, programming or scripting or anything the like. They want something that's going to be more Excel like and one that they can actually maintain moving forward as well. So they want to be able to get their hands dirty, be able to build their own reports as they should, and if they're savvy enough, be able to even do their own modeling and so forth. So we promote that quite heavily, certainly with our clients, that it is a tool that they can own and maintain. And look, both you and I, we've worked with many other tools and we've seen a lot over the years, and it is still the one that I reckon that finance can own and maintain. And we've got obviously plenty of clients that are doing that right now. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I think you've touched on a really important point there that, whilst having it be more like Excel or to have the look and feel of Excel is really, one of the key benefits of adaptive planning. Obviously, it's got the smarts behind it. It's not doesn't have the limitations of Excel, so it's obviously going to reduce that resistance because they're already familiar with Excel, and if they get access to an application that is very much like what they're used to, then that's going to reduce the barrier. When you say usability, do you mean for the everyday user that's accessing the system, or do you mean someone that is, perhaps the system administrator, or perhaps someone that is an Excel guru?
Yeah.
Where do you sort of see that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And a lot of the times when FP&A professionals are going in to evaluate, what tool they should go with, they're usually evaluating one that's, we all have our biases, but one that they can use and one that's all, very powerful and so forth. What they tend to forget is that you also need a tool to, get others as part of the business to use. And when I say other parts of the business, the budget owners, the department managers, the cost center managers, and so forth, they're the ones that really have to get into the solution as well. It's not just for the FP&A or finance team. To answer that question, Brett, I think, it's even more important that the tool there is familiarity, like you said, with Excel, that the end users can see themselves using it. They're comfortable with it. It's not overly complicated, and one that, they readily able to, log in, key in their budgets at the end of the day, be able to run their reports, but do it without that sort of friction, do that without any, back to basics, things falling over on them or, them unable to get to the numbers that they need. Because if they don't, you know what happens? They'll just revert back to
To Excel.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the questions we often get asked is what sort of skills do you need to be able to own and manage something like Workday Adaptive Planning? And the way I sort of best interpret is if you're good at Excel modeling and you like to get into Excel and build models there and formulas, then the learning curve to do that in adaptive planning is quite small. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's true, and the proof is in the consultants that we hire.
Mm,
A lot of the team, our consultants, our delivery leads, and so forth, they have background in accounting.
mm,
They've worked in FP&A or they've worked as systems accountants. They don't come from an IT sort of background. They come from generally finance, and that means they've been able to bring their Excel skills and translate it quite easily to the solution and
mm.
to adaptive planning. So yeah, look, there's others out there that are going to be more technical,
Yep.
and they tend to be the ones that look, they may have ultimate flexibility. You can do whatever you want in them,
Mm,
and you can customize them to the nth degree.
mm,
One of the best things about adaptive is the fact that it doesn't try to, you know, do everything. It knows it can't, but what it can do, it does very well, and that's suitable to 90% out there.
yeah. Well, I mean, when I think about our client base and the projects that we've done, it's very rare that you come across a use case where adaptive isn't really a good fit. And we'd be the first to say if that's not a good fit for adaptive, but it's a rare occurrence. And certainly in our 10 years of being an adaptive planning partner, yeah, I'd say that, I could count that on less than one hand in terms of the number of times I've had an issue with the use cases.
Yeah, look, more often than not, it's going to be the people and process that you need
Mm,
to factor in as well, right? So technology will, can only take you so far. However, you can't forget about
yeah,
the people and the process.
yep,
So yes, if the technology can get you 89% of the way there, perhaps that last, 5%, it's
yeah.
a slight tweak to the process. So
So if we think about adaptive, and there's going to be some people that are listening to this that really have no idea what Workday Adaptive Planning is. So if you were to describe, what you get out of the box with adaptive versus what you actually have to configure in the solution, I mean, how would you best describe that?
in terms of what you get out of the box, so just keeping in mind, Workday Adaptive Planning was designed and built for finance.
I think it
Was
was founded by an ex-CFO,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that's
And
right.
and they were, he was so frustrated that there was no market solution on the market that would actually do what he needed and have the flexibility that he needed. And he actually founded what was then Adaptive Insights. So
Yeah.
yeah, an interesting story. But certainly from a finance perspective, he's a CFO, so he knew how finance people view the world, and particularly in FP&A.
Yeah, so obviously with that in mind, being the one of the core founders, being an ex CFO, he obviously built the solution more geared towards finance. So out of the box, there's key concepts around version, scenario management, forecasting, all those sort of components are out of the box. Even calling things out like the general ledger or the org structure,
Yeah,
things that are basic concepts. There's actually, dedicated components to handle that or modules that can be more specific to that handles those situations. So there's things like even financial consolidations, things that we see a lot these days, and that's organizations trying to do or improve their allocations. There's a allocations module out of the
yeah,
box,
okay, yep,
There's handling things like exchange rates. That's all out of the box. So even some of the reporting and, the drag and drop nature of it, whilst yes, you have to build your own, but the concepts around month to date, year to date, those sort of things are sort of as part of the solution. I mean, I know we'll get into that a bit later around, the time to value and how long it takes to implement. But yeah, again, one of the reasons why we love the solution is that you just get a lot out of the box.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so you can sort of hit the ground running when you're working with the finance teams as to what are your planning models that you'd like. You don't spend a lot of time building the basic building blocks that's already there, and then you're sort of just there to really add the value that you can as a consultant.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Even very basic things like the user interface,
mm,
you know, we don't, as consultants, don't have to get involved on that one because the interface is already there. It's designed. It's more about the configuration side of things. So even something as small as that, means that you can get that value quite quickly.
yeah, absolutely. And I know probably fair to say, and we will cover integration in another topic on another day, but the integration is probably the most technical aspect of any deployment. So integrating with the source system, typically the general ledger.
Yeah, look, that's probably as technical as it gets. I know generally when we deploy adaptive, there is obviously a conversation with, say, the IT team. It's usually a very, very simple conversation. I mean, most modern cloud solution these days, it's, you can get access to the data. It's REST API, all that.
Mm,
And so, most IT teams, to be honest, they'd rather finance,
yeah.
maintain and own this. It's, one
Mm,
less system for them to add to their list where they've got to
mm,
have oversight over. It's really just that integration
mm,
bit, and to be honest, it's pretty standard with any other cloud applications these days. It's pretty
mm.
straightforward.
And I think that you touched on an important point there, Dave. When we're yeah, obviously having conversations about solutions in this space, we are typically positioning to the Office of Finance. Like IT are involved sometimes, but generally to a very limited degree. So this is really a finance owned project in the main. And we'll talk a little bit about, what a project looks like and how you set yourself up for success. But yeah, it's definitely a finance led project as a rule. But obviously, depending on the size of the project, you may have a PMO or something like that involved as well. But IT requirements and involvement is very limited.
Yeah, it's limited and it's minimal. It doesn't need that
Mm,
sort of control. And one analogy to put it, y- is assume you're deploying an Excel model. You're not going to get IT involved when trying to deploy spreadsheets as an example. It's largely the same for adaptive planning.
mm. So there's probably one further question which I'll ask, and probably the last one in this particular segment. You mentioned at the start about Chat GPT and Claude and those sort of large language models. So how do for someone that's looking at improving their FP&A, what if they said, "Oh, I'm just going to get Claude to do that for me"? What would you say to them?
Be very careful around going through that approach. I mean, look, depending on what you want to get out of Claude, but Claude still is not going to help you distribute and get other department managers to
Yeah.
enter in their key inputs, right? I mean, there's still that element of getting others
Mm.
to do their budgets, plans, and
Yeah,
forecasts.
I mean, Claude, it's going to need a source of truth for its data as well. And where is it going to get that from? So, potentially it could traverse your ERP and your spreadsheets and all that, but really it does need a consolidated data foundation. And I think, yeah, if you think back to the 90s, garbage in, garbage out, there's no difference with that today with these large language models. They need a source of truth to which they can rely on to be able to do their best work.
Yeah, look, context is key.
Yeah,
You still need that data, and it's got to be right as well. I mean, obviously,
mm.
if you're gonna
Data quality,
if you're gonna be
absolutely.
applying and leveraging AI over, poor data, you're gonna get that, as you said
Mm,
before, garbage in, garbage out, right?
mm,
So, you got to be careful with that. But the way you'd go about it, so just I think it's important you just park that AI conversation part of
mm.
it. You still need the basics.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you still need good quality data. You still need good quality let's say, modeling out of your drivers.
Mm,
Because if
mm,
you think about it, the AI engine, when you ask it, the questions of, why have I got this variance,
mm.
or can you help me explain this a little bit further, and try and double click on a number, it's going to drill back to that model,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
it wants to understand the
yeah.
non-financial drivers and
Mm.
so
And
forth.
I think you touched on an important point there because there needs to be security around what you're doing in that function. You can't just have the data open to everyone and Claude just you know pulling payroll data out and representing that to everyone in the business. So you need to have a tightly controlled security model around that. And I'm not too sure, large language models would be, very careful about that. And we also know that humans need to be in the loop of these things and to be able to promote collaboration and things like that. So I think there's obviously a place absolutely for FP&A solutions to do this and uh, large language models can form part of the equation that in deploying an FP&A solution, but you still need that core engine to support it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, we got many of our clients combining the two together.
Mm,
So they're using adaptive planning for, their core FP&A needs, but
mm,
then, for some of that analysis over the top, if it's preparing for board packs and trying to get some of
yeah,
that language right, sometimes, yeah, they do a cut and paste, and they leverage their own AI engine just to help with some of the
mm,
analysis and comparatives and so forth
yeah.
for their board packs.
And look, I mean, this is why it's such an exciting space to be in because we know, Workday, for example, how much investment is going into bringing AI to their adaptive planning solution and how it's being integrated within that. And we've already witnessed some of those development. Being able to you know ask a question in natural language and have it pull back. Explain a variance or the top five variances within a P&L, for example, and then
Yep.
drill down into the detail. So that's what's to come, and that's exciting. But yeah, we're about solving for the now, which is the fundamental. And I think adaptive planning is certainly a great option for businesses to consider as part of that.